Nobody knew her name. That was the whole point, she had decided, the very first time she licked the envelope and pressed it shut. She did not want to be found. She did not want a phone call, a thank you card, or someone's tears on the other end of a line she did not have time to answer. She was 53 years old. She worked the overnight shift at a commercial laundry facility on the southeast edge of town, and she had $17 left after rent, utilities, and the blood pressure medication she split in half to make the prescription last. She mailed 10 of those dollars every single month for 10 years. 120 envelopes, 120 $10 bills folded into thirds, tucked beside a single handwritten line on an index card. No return address, no signature, just a post office box listed in a small local ad she had cut from a church bulletin and kept under a refrigerator magnet for 11 years before she finally worked up the courage to use it. The family's name was Greer. She had never met them. She only knew what she had read. If you're still with me right now, I want you to hold on to something before we go any further, because this story is not really about $10. It never was. It is about what a person chooses to do in the dark when no one is watching, and what that choice can build across a decade of quiet, faithful mornings. Marvella Simmons had lived alone in the same two-room apartment on Caldwell Street for 19 years. She had come to this city at 34, following a job offer at a textile processing plant that folded 14 months after she arrived. She had stayed anyway because by then there was nothing to go back to. Her mother was gone. The house she had grown up in was sold for back taxes. The sister she had grown up beside had her own 4 children and her own debts and her own silent weight to carry, and Marvella did not add to it. She found the laundry job through a handwritten card on a bulletin board outside a coin laundry on Whitmore Avenue. The pay was $9.20 an hour when she started. Over 19 years it had climbed to $14.60, and she was grateful for every dime of that climb. She worked 10-hour shifts 4 nights a week, folding and sorting and loading the heavy industrial drums that cleaned uniforms for restaurants and hospitals, and one downtown hotel whose name she knew from the napkins she shook out by the thousands. Her back ached every morning when the shift ended. She took a city bus home before sunrise, slept until noon, and then got up and did the small domestic things that kept her life moving. Groceries, laundry of her own at the coin machines down the street, phone calls with her sister on Sunday evenings that ran long because neither of them wanted to hang up first. She did not complain about any of it. That was not stubbornness or performance. It was simply the shape of the life she had built, and she knew, better than most people give themselves credit for knowing, the difference between a hard life and a ruined one. The apartment on Caldwell Street had 2 rooms and a bathroom with a cracked tile above the tub that the landlord had been meaning to replace since the first Bush administration. The kitchen window looked onto the alley and the back wall of the dry cleaner next door. The living room window looked onto the street, which was better. On Sunday mornings, Marvella liked to sit in the chair she had bought at the church rummage sale 7 years back and drink her first cup of coffee in the morning light and watch the neighborhood wake up. The man 2 doors down who walked his dog at the same time every morning, regardless of weather, the couple from the building across the street who stood on their porch and talked in the way that people talk when they are genuinely happy to be standing next to each other. She was not lonely in these mornings, she was simply present, which was not the same thing. She had not always been so settled in herself. There had been years, in her late 30s especially, when the apartment felt more like a waiting room than a home, and when she sat at the kitchen table late at night and felt the weight of a life that had not gone the way she had once imagined. She had imagined marriage. She had imagined children of her own. She had imagined a different city, a different work, a different morning view from a different window. But the imagined life and the actual life had parted ways somewhere in her early 30s, and she had learned, slowly and without bitterness, to stop grieving the distance between them and to pay attention instead to what was actually here. The chair from the rummage sale, the window facing the street, the city bus that ran on time most mornings and late on rainy ones. The work that kept her, even if it kept her tired. She had her faith, though she wore it quietly. She did not speak about it at work, and she did not carry it into conversations uninvited. She carried it privately, the way some people carry a photograph in a wallet, not taking it out often, but knowing it is there and finding that knowledge steadying on the hard days. She had read about the Greer family in a small community newsletter that one of her co-workers had left in the break room on a Tuesday night in October, 12 years before the story we are telling now ends. The newsletter was 2 stapled pages, printed at a copy shop, the kind of thing a church auxiliary puts together when a family in the congregation falls through the floor of an ordinary life into something worse. Deacon Harold Greer had died of a stroke at 41, leaving behind his wife Denise and their 3 children. Marcus, who was 12, Leah, who was 9, and the youngest, a little boy named Court, who had just turned 6. Denise worked part-time at a school cafeteria. The mortgage on their small house had a year left on the adjustable term, and the new rate was going to make the payment jump by $240 a month. The newsletter had a post office box address for anyone who wanted to send a card or a small gift. It asked for nothing specific. It simply said that this family could use a reminder that people care. Marvella read it twice, standing at the break room sink, and then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket. She sat with it for 11 months before she did anything. That is not hesitation. That is the kind of decision a person makes slowly because they want to mean it, and because they know that once they start something like this, stopping would feel like a small betrayal. The first envelope went out on a Wednesday in September. She had gone to the bank the day before and withdrawn a $10 bill, which the teller had given her crisp and flat. She folded it into thirds. She wrote on an index card in her ordinary cursive 3 words, "Thinking of you." That was all. She did not pray over it exactly, but she paused at the mailbox for a moment before she let it go, the way a person pauses at the edge of something they cannot take back. Then she dropped it in. She felt something on the walk home that she did not have an easy word for. Not pride, not satisfaction, something quieter than either and steadier. For 2 years, Denise Greer assumed the envelopes were coming from someone in the congregation. A deacon's widow, perhaps. A quiet woman from the Tuesday morning Bible study group. She opened each one at the kitchen table on whatever day it arrived, and she set the $10 bill in the small ceramic bowl on the counter where the children's lunch money went, and she added it to the household. In the first year, those $10 paid for exactly 1 school field trip, 1 Saturday for Marcus. In the second year, they covered the copay on Leah's inhaler, twice. Small things. The kind of small thing that the world tends not to count, but that a family balancing on a narrow margin counts very carefully. Denise asked around, quietly, carefully, the way people do when they don't want to seem ungrateful or intrusive. She mentioned the envelopes to the pastor, to the 2 women she sat with at the church's monthly potluck, to her own mother when she called on Sunday evenings. Nobody knew anything. The pastor said it was an act of grace, and he meant it the way pastors mean such things, not as a deflection but as a genuine theological observation. Denise accepted that. She put it away in the part of her mind where she kept things she couldn't explain and didn't need to. The years move the way years move when you're a single mother of 3 working a part-time school cafeteria job in a house with a mortgage. They move through crises and repairs and small victories and long exhaustions. The furnace went out in the second winter. Denise called the repair company and sat with the number on a piece of paper for 4 days before she called, because she knew what the bill would be and she was calculating which other bill would have to wait. She fixed it. The next year the water heater went, and she fixed that too, in the way a person fixes things when there is no one else to call. Slowly, with research, with the help of a neighbour who knew about water heaters, with a payment plan she negotiated, by calling the company twice and waiting on hold each time for longer than she had. She was not special in this. She was simply a woman who understood that things breaking was not a verdict on her life but a condition of it, and that conditions could be managed. The cafeteria job expanded into full-time in the 5th year, which helped. The school where she worked was 3 bus stops from the house, and she knew all 3 bus drivers by name before the first year was out. She was the kind of person who learned names, who asked after children and remembered what was said and followed up the following week. In a building of 400 elementary school children, she was the woman who could tell you on any given Tuesday which child had a birthday that week, which child had been absent the week before and was now back and should maybe be checked on, which child ate lunch too fast because they were nervous about something, and which one ate too slowly because they were sad. She had not set out to become that person. She simply paid attention, and paying attention over time becomes a kind of knowing. Marcus graduated from high school and got a partial scholarship to the state university 2 hours north. Leah grew into a steady, serious girl who sang in the choir and took care of her little brother with a maturity that sometimes broke Denise's heart to watch. Court, the youngest, grew up bright and quick and given to long silences that Denise had learned to read as contentment rather than sadness most of the time. The envelopes never stopped. Marvela never once considered stopping. There were months when the $10 was genuinely hard. A month when her bus pass expired and she could not renew it, and she walked 40 minutes each way to the laundry facility for 3 weeks. The walks were not dramatic. They were ordinary and tiring, through neighborhoods she knew well, on sidewalks that were cracked in places and buckled in others, under streetlights that were out in 2 spots between Caldwell and the facility's back entrance. She wore her work shoes, which were not walking shoes, and by the end of the 3rd week, her heels were raw. She renewed the bus pass when she had the money for it, and did not think much more about the 3 weeks, a month when her blood pressure medication ran out 2 weeks early because she had miscounted, and she spent 2 of those weeks rationing and sweating through the nights and telling herself it was fine. It was not entirely fine, which she knew, but it was manageable, which she also knew, and the difference between those 2 things was where she chose to live her attention during those particular 2 weeks. She called the pharmacy on the 15th day and asked about a bridge supply, and the pharmacist was kind and helped her, and she thanked him in the way she thanked people when she meant it, which was simply and directly. A month when the building's furnace went out in February and she wore her coat indoors for 11 days while the landlord moved at his own slow pace. She heated water on the stove for washing, she slept in the coat and a second pair of socks. She worked her night shifts and came home in the cold morning air and went to bed in her clothes, and she got up and did it again. She left 3 messages for the landlord over the 11 days. He fixed it on the 12th. She did not make a thing of it. Through every one of those months, the envelope still went out. She kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer beside the takeout menus she never used, and the extra pens she kept there for no particular reason. She wrote the date in the notebook each time she mailed one, not the amount, not a note to herself, just the date in 2-digit month and 2-digit day format, and a small check mark. The notebook filled up slowly, 1 line per month, 12 lines per year. She didn't look back through the pages very often. When she did, something about the column of dates steadied her in a way she couldn't fully describe. Marcus Greer came home from the university the summer after his junior year with a degree in progress and a summer internship at an engineering firm downtown. He was 22, lean and serious, with his father's quiet way of entering a room. He had grown up knowing, in the abstract way children know things, that his family had been helped. His mother had mentioned the envelopes over the years, not often, but enough that the fact of them had become a fixed point in his understanding of his childhood. Someone had cared. Someone unknown had cared, faithfully, for a long time. And that faithfulness was not nothing. He thought about it more than he ever admitted. He thought about it the way you think about something that doesn't have a clear shape yet but keeps returning, the way a song returns that you can't quite place. He had grown up and left the house and taken a bus to a university 2 hours north and sat in classrooms and laboratories and eaten cheap food and stayed up late working through problem sets, and through all of it, somewhere in the background, was the knowledge that someone had been mailing his family $10 a month for as long as he could remember. He had been 12 when his father died. He was 22 now. He could not account for all of the years in between in any clean and organised way, but he knew that those years had included field trips and inhalers, and once a pair of shoes for court that his mother had bought when money was particularly tight, and he suspected, without being able to prove it, that the $10 had touched all of those things at some point, in the way that money touches things when a household is running on almost nothing. The summer he came home, he thought about it in a more specific way. He was studying systems and logistics as part of his engineering track, and his mind had developed a habit of tracing things back to their source. He asked his mother to show him the envelopes she had kept. Denise had kept all of them. That is the kind of thing she did. They were in a shoebox on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, banded together in groups of 12 by rubber bands that had grown brittle over the years. 108 envelopes at that point. Marcus spread them across the kitchen table one Saturday morning in July and looked at them for a long time. He was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was thinking seriously about something, not distant, just internal, processing without output. The postmarks were all from the same postal zone. The handwriting on the address was always the same. The index cards inside were all written in the same cursive, the same ink, the same sparse economy of words. Thinking of you, you're not forgotten, still here, you are not. Praying for your family. God bless. And then, in the most recent ones, 3 words repeated across 8 months, like the sender was beginning to wind something down and didn't know quite how to say it. Just wanted you to know. Marcus was not sure what he was looking for until he found the first concrete thing. The handwriting on the address included a consistent peculiarity in the capital G of Greer. The letter curled back on itself in a way that reminded him, for reasons he couldn't pin down, of something he had seen before. He set that aside. He checked with the post office, which could not help him with the sender's identity, and he did not push. He went to the church his mother still attended and asked the pastor, who still did not know. He asked his aunt, his mother's older sister, who lived across town and who had been in the original congregation 12 years ago. His aunt didn't know either, but she mentioned in the course of a long Sunday afternoon conversation that the newsletter had been distributed to a few places beyond the congregation. A community board at the library, a coin laundry on Whitmore Avenue, a break room at a commercial facility on the southeast side. Marcus wrote down all three. He was not in a hurry. He had learned patience from watching his mother, who had never rushed a single important thing in his memory. He sat with the 3 locations for 2 weeks, and then on a Thursday evening, he drove to each of them. The library had changed its community board management twice and kept no records. The coin laundry on Whitmore Avenue was still there. The woman who ran it had owned it for 26 years and remembered the bulletin boards, though she had stopped maintaining it sometime around when the newsletter would have been posted. She said she couldn't tell him much. She said, almost as an afterthought, that the people who used to read the board were the same people who worked nights mostly. The laundry facility down on the southeast side had a lot of overnight workers who stopped in on their way home in the mornings. Marcus thanked her and drove to the southeast side. He sat in the parking lot across the street from the facility for 10 minutes, thinking. The building was long and low, with loading bays at the back and a small front entrance with a card reader beside the door. A sign above the entrance said the company name. Nothing unusual, nothing that looked like the source of 12 years of careful faithfulness. The facility on the southeast side had a night shift that ended at 6 in the morning. Marcus arrived at 5:45 on a Friday and stood in the parking lot across the street. He was not entirely sure what he was doing. He had told his mother he was following up on the newsletter lead, and she had said quietly, "Don't push anyone, Marcus." He was not planning to push anyone. He was planning to stand in a parking lot at 5:45 in the morning and see what he could see, which felt modest enough. He watched people come out in small groups as the shift wound down, moving in the tired, unhurried way of people who have been on their feet for 10 hours. Most of them walked to a bus stop on the corner. They wore work clothes, plain and practical, and they carried bags and cups and the particular blank-faced tiredness of night shift workers at the end of a long stretch. He watched them without watching any one of them too closely, just taking in the flow. He watched for 40 minutes. He was about to leave when an older woman came out alone, pulling a coat around herself against the early morning air, and walked to the bus stop. She was small and straight-backed, with close-cut natural hair gone grey at the temples, and she carried a cloth tote bag that she held with both hands. Something about the way she moved made him stay. It was not anything dramatic. She just moved with a particular kind of composure, unhurried and contained. A person who had been walking to bus stops in early mornings for a long time and had made a kind of peace with it. He crossed the street. He was not sure what he meant to say. He introduced himself, which felt inadequate. He said he was looking for someone who might have helped his family. He described the envelopes, the $10 a month, the 12 years, the index cards with the handwriting. He said he was not trying to intrude and that no one had to answer anything, and he was sorry to approach a stranger at a bus stop before sunrise. He watched her face. Her face did something he would think about for a long time afterward. It didn't open with surprise. It went still, the way a room goes still when you walk in and realize you have interrupted something private. She held very steady. She looked at him with dark, careful eyes, and he had the distinct feeling that she was deciding something, working through something rapidly and quietly behind the composure. She was quiet for a moment. The bus was still 4 minutes away according to the posted schedule. "How did you find the facility?" she asked. He told her about the newsletter, the community board, the coin laundry. She listened to all of it without interrupting. "You didn't have to do all that," she said finally. "I know," he said. "My mother's been wanting to say thank you for 12 years. She looked down the street in the direction the bus would come from. "I don't need thanking," she said. It was not cold when she said it. It was something else. "I know that too," he said. They stood there for a moment. The street was quiet. A delivery truck rumbled past. Your name is Marcus, she said, not as a question. She had been reading those index cards for years, which meant she had been writing them for years, which meant some version of this family had been real and present in her mind for 12 years. Yes, ma'am, he said. How's your mother? He told her. He told her Denise was well, that Leah was working as a medical assistant, that Court had just turned 18 and was applying to colleges. He watched something move across her face while he talked, something warm and privately satisfied, like a person hearing that a garden they had tended from a distance had come into bloom. Her name was Marvella. She told him that when the bus was 1 minute out, as if she had timed the disclosure to limit any extended conversation about it. She told him she had seen the newsletter at work. She said she had thought about his family a lot over the years, not in a sad way she wanted him to know, but in a wondering way. The bus arrived. She picked up her tote bag. Wait, Marcus said. She turned. He did not have a speech. He was 22 years old, and he had driven across town on a quiet intuition and found the person he was looking for, and now he was standing on a city sidewalk in the early morning, and he had no words that were big enough for what he wanted to say. He said the plainest true thing he could find. My family wouldn't be what it is without you. Marvella Simmons looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were dark and steady, and they did not fill with tears. Not then. You would have been fine, she said. Your mother is strong. She stepped onto the bus. Marcus stood on the sidewalk and watched it pull away. He called his mother from the parking lot. He sat in the car and talked for 45 minutes, and at some point his mother started crying, and he let her, and at some point he did, too. Quietly. The way you do when you're tired and something you have been carrying for years finally puts itself down. Denise Greer called the laundry facility the following Monday and left a message. The message said she would love to have Marvella over for dinner sometime if she was willing, and that there was no pressure, and that she understood completely if the answer was no. Marvella called back on Wednesday evening. She said yes. Denise cooked for 2 days. That is its own kind of testimony. What a woman does with a kitchen when she wants to say something that words have not finished saying. She made the things she made well, the things her mother had taught her and that she had fed her children on through every lean year. Slow-cooked greens with a ham hock she had been saving in the freezer, cornbread from a cast-iron skillet that came out brown and perfect at the edges, a pot of rice with seasoning that filled the house with a warmth that went well past cooking. She made sweet potato pie the night before and let it set overnight. She made a chicken that she brined in the morning and roasted in the afternoon so the house smelled of it from noon onward. She did not tell herself she was trying to impress anyone. She told herself she was cooking a proper Saturday dinner, which was what she did, and which happened to be for someone who had been part of her family for 12 years without knowing it. That was all. Marvella arrived on a Saturday afternoon in October, carrying a small potted plant in a clay pot. She stood in the doorway of the Greer house for a moment before she came in, taking it in quietly. The narrow hallway, the framed photographs on the wall, the worn wooden floor that was clean and cared for. She could tell from the photographs something about the children at different ages, and something about Denise at different ages, and something about a man she recognized as Harold from the description she had read in the newsletter 12 years ago. He was handsome and broad-shouldered, and he was laughing in the photograph, which was the kind of thing she noticed. A life held together carefully, over a long time. She recognized what that looked like. Leah was there, and Court, and Denise, and the house was full of a warmth that the autumn light through the living room windows made golden. Denise hugged her at the door and held on for a moment, and Marvella let her. She didn't cry then either. She was a woman who had kept herself contained for a long time, not out of coldness, but out of habit. The habit of a person who has learned to carry their life alone and has become very good at it. She felt the hug, and she received it, which was the best she could do. And it was enough. They sat at the table and ate, and Leah asked Marvella about her work, and Court asked her, with the directness of an 18-year-old, how she had decided to do it. Marvella thought about that for a moment. She set down her fork. She said she had read about them and she had not been able to put the reading down. She said there had been something in the newsletter about 3 children who had just lost their father, and that was the part she could not put down. She paused. Outside, the October trees were bare already, and the light was the thin, clear kind that comes in the fall when everything is stripped back to its honest shape. "Did you lose your father young?" Denise asked her gently. "I lost everybody young," Marvella said. and she said it in a way that closed the door on that part quietly, without drama. Marcus was not there that Saturday. He was back at the university for his final year, but he called at 5 o'clock from the road because his mother had told him what time dinner was, and his voice came through on the speaker on the kitchen counter while Marvella was helping Denise clear the plates. She heard him say he was glad she came. She said she was glad too. She meant it. There is a thing that happens sometimes when a kindness that has lived privately for years finally becomes known. The people on the receiving end often want to do something large and immediate to match what they have learned, to answer a decade of quiet with some proportionate gesture. Denise was not that kind of person. She did not present Marvella with anything that evening. She did not speak about money or obligation or what was owed. She simply fed her and introduced her to her children and let the afternoon be what it was. An ordinary Saturday in an ordinary house, made luminous by the fact of who was sitting at the table. Marvella left at 7:30 while there was still a little light in the sky. Denise walked her to the door. They exchanged phone numbers, which they had somehow not gotten to until then. "You'll come again," Denise said. It was not a question. "I will," Marvella said. She drove home on roads she knew well through neighbourhoods she had been driving through for 19 years, and she sat in the parking lot outside her building for a few minutes before she went in. Not because she was sad, because she needed to be still for a moment with whatever was sitting in her chest. She went upstairs. She put the kettle on. She opened the kitchen drawer and took out the small notebook, and she found the most recent date, and she looked at the column of marks that stretched back across 60-odd pages. 120 lines. 10 years. She closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. She did not need it anymore. In the months that followed, Marvella and Denise spoke on the phone every few weeks, sometimes about nothing particular. Denise's updates about the children, a church function she had attended, a repair the house needed, Marvella's account of a notable night at work, a good thing she had found at the grocery store on sale, a Sunday afternoon she had spent in the park because the weather was decent and she had decided to let herself do nothing for 3 hours. It was the kind of friendship that builds without ceremony in the space between other things. Denise sent her a text on a Tuesday in November, a photograph of the small potted plant on the kitchen windowsill, with the words, "Still going strong." Marvella looked at the photograph for a long time before she replied. She wrote back one word. Good. It was the right length. The relationship did not announce itself as a significant thing. That was part of what made it significant. It was two women in the same city who had been connected by an unsigned index card for 12 years and who were now in the ordinary, unsentimental way of adults who have learned to receive what is given, allowing that connection to become a real thing. They were not filling roles for each other. They were not performing gratitude or performing humility. They were simply two people who had found that they liked talking to each other and who had enough sense to let that be enough. Court came to visit Marvella once, on his own, in the spring. He was applying to the state university where Marcus had gone, and he wanted advice from someone he described to his mother, without quite meaning to be funny, as a person who had figured out how to live carefully. Marvella made coffee and they sat at her kitchen table and she told him what she knew, which was not everything, but which was more than nothing. She told him that careful was not the same as small. She told him that the most important thing she had ever done had cost her very little money and a great deal of steadiness. She told him that steadiness was a skill like any other, that it could be practiced and improved, and that the practice was never dramatic. It was just repeating the small right thing on the days when you did not feel like it. Court sat across from her and listened the way young people listen when they are genuinely paying attention, which is differently from when they are being polite. He asked her what the small right thing was. In her case, she said, showing up to work, mailing the envelope, calling her sister on Sunday. He said, "That's it?" She said, "That's a lot if you do it for 19 years. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he got it. She thought he probably did. He got into the university. He called her when he found out before he called his mother. She was in the middle of folding laundry, her own, at the coin machines on Whitmore, and she stood there with a pillowcase half folded in her hands and listened to him holler on the other end, and she laughed, which was something she did not do often enough, and which, when it came, was genuine and uncomplicated. She called his mother after, to tell her he had already called, and Denise laughed too. The same kind of laugh, the kind that is relief and joy in equal measure without any particular word for the combination. Marcus graduated in May. Denise drove up for the ceremony and she invited Marvella, who hesitated for exactly 2 days before she said yes and arranged to have someone cover her Friday shift. She sat in the bleachers beside Denise and watched a young man she had never met until the previous autumn walk across a stage in the sunshine, and she understood that she was sitting inside something she had helped build, however quietly, however partially, however far from any plan. She had not built it for this moment. She had built it envelope by envelope, without imagining a moment like this as the reason. That was the thing she kept coming back to. Sitting in those bleachers in the late May light, listening to the name Marcus Greer called out across a gymnasium full of people who did not know who she was. She had done it because she could not put the reading down. That was the whole truth of it. And everything that followed, every year of it, was simply the consequence of doing a small, faithful thing, and then doing it again. Leah called her Auntie Marvella for the first time in June, and neither of them made a thing of it. The summer passed warm and ordinary. Marvella's back still ached in the mornings. The bus still ran behind on rainy days. The coin laundry still smelled like detergent and the particular tired warmth of machines that run all day. She still walked through the door of the facility on the southeast side 4 nights a week, still pulled on her work gloves, still found her rhythm in the hum of the industrial drums and the clean, functional repetition of a job she had done for 19 years. Nothing dramatic had changed in her life. That was what she understood, sitting with it in the quiet of her apartment on a Tuesday afternoon in August, watching the light move across the kitchen floor. She had not changed because of what the Greer family had done by finding her. She had always been this. The finding had only made it visible to people who had not known where to look. She thought about the first envelope sometimes. The walk to the mailbox on Caldwell Street on a Wednesday in September. The pause before she let it go. She had been 43 years old. She had $17. She had kept 10. There is a certain kind of person who gives without any expectation of being found, not because they want to be noble about it, but because the giving itself is already the thing, complete in itself, not a down payment on a future moment of recognition. Marvella was that kind of person. She had been that kind of person long before the Greers, and she remained it after. What the Greers gave her was something she had not known she was missing. Not gratitude exactly. Something warmer and more specific. The knowledge that the years she had spent doing a small, faithful thing had not dissolved into silence. They had arrived. They had mattered. They had fed children and covered co-pays and funded one field trip and held one family upright on the narrowest of margins during the years when the margins were everything. In September, exactly 1 year after Marcus had found her at the bus stop, Denise called on a Wednesday morning. She called at 9, knowing Marvella would be awake by then, having come home from her shift at 6 and slept for a few hours and gotten up again to start her day. She said she wanted to tell her something, and that it was not a big thing, but it was a true thing. She said she had set aside a small amount of money over the past year, not a lot, but something, and she had looked up a family in need through a community board at her church, and she had sent them a card. Marvella was quiet for a moment. "What did you write?" she asked. "Thinking of you," Denise said. There was a long pause on the line, the kind of pause that is not empty. "Good," Marvella said. She set the phone down on the kitchen table when they were done. Through the window, the September light was coming in at an angle that turned the linoleum warm. She sat with it for a while, her hands folded on the table, and she thought about envelopes and small amounts of money, and the long, accretive patience of kindness passed between people who do not know each other's names. She thought about what a decade of $10 had built and what Denise was now beginning, and she understood, sitting with it, that this was how it worked. Not loudly, not all at once. The notebook was still in the kitchen drawer. She opened it and looked at the last line, the most recent date, and the check mark beside it. Then she turned to a fresh page and wrote the date, this September morning, in 2-digit month and 2-digit day. And she put a small mark beside it. Not for herself, just because it felt right to mark it. She closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer between the takeout menus she never used and the extra pen she kept there for no particular reason. Outside, the bus was running. The morning was ordinary and sufficient and entirely hers. If you've ever held on to something quietly, something you did for someone who never knew it was you, or if someone once did that for you and you still wonder who it was, leave a word below. These stories live in that quiet place. There are more of them waiting, just like this one. This story is a work of narrative fiction inspired by real acts of anonymous generosity.